You want to know the truth? None of us thought she'd last the week. I'm not proud of that now, but I'd be lying if I told you otherwise, and this whole story falls apart the second I start lying to you. So let me just say it plain. When Petty Officer Dana Reyes walked into our staging area outside Camp Whitlock, that dusty stretch of nothing near the Helmand border, the first thing I felt wasn't respect. It was doubt, the kind that sits in your chest like a swallowed stone. She was smaller than the rest of us, maybe 5'5" if she stood up straight, which she rarely did because snipers learned to fold themselves down into nothing. Quiet. Brown hair tied back so tight it looked painful. She carried her own gear, didn't ask for help, didn't make eye contact longer than she had to. And the guys, well, you know how guys are. They're sending us a babysitter now. That was Cooper. Big mouth, big shoulders, decent shooter, but he ran his jaw more than his rifle. We got a real war out here. Command sends us a girl with a long gun. I should have told him to shut it. I didn't. I just looked at her to see if she'd heard. She had, of course she had. She heard everything. That was the thing about Reyes nobody understood until later. She was listening even when you thought she'd checked out. She just stood there with her rifle case over her shoulder and let Cooper's words slide off her like rain off canvas. Didn't flinch. Didn't fire back. Just found her cot, dropped her bag, and started cleaning her weapon. I remember the sound of it. Click, slide. The soft scrape of a cloth on metal. While Cooper was still talking, she was already working. Let me set this up properly, because the place matters. It was October. The heat had finally started breaking, but the days still cooked you and the nights froze you, and the dust got into everything, your eyes, your teeth, the cracks of your knuckles. You learned to taste it. You learned to stop minding. We were 2 weeks into a deployment that was supposed to be a security operation and had quietly turned into something uglier. There was a village about 9 clicks out, a place called Sarkani, and intel said a man named Tariq Massoud had moved in. Massoud ran weapons. Worse than that, he ran people, kids mostly, pulled into his outfit because their families couldn't say no. Command wanted him watched. Then Command wanted him gone. The line between those two things kept moving every time the sat phone rang. Our team was 8 strong. SEAL team element plus 2 attachments. I was the team's communications guy, which is a polite way of saying I was the one who carried the radio and prayed it kept working. You don't get medals for being the radio guy. You get to live, mostly, and you get to hear everything, and you get to be the one who has to find the words when something happens that has no words. Reyes was the 9th. A scout sniper on loan from a unit I'd never heard of, with a record nobody had seen because half of it was classified and the other half she wouldn't talk about. Our team lead was a senior chief named Vargas, 22 years in. Face like a leather glove that had been left in the sun. He didn't doubt her, or if he did, he never let it show, and that was the difference between Vargas and the rest of us. He'd worked with enough people to know that the loud ones aren't the dangerous ones. "You good with that rifle?" he asked her first night. "Yes, Senior Chief." "How good?" She thought about it, actually thought like it was a math problem, good enough that you won't have to ask again. Vargas almost smiled, almost, "We'll see." I should tell you a little about Vargas, because if you want to understand how the rest of us ended up trusting her, it started with him. Vargas had buried friends. You could see it in the way he carried himself, careful, like a man who knew exactly how much a single bad decision weighed because he'd had to pick up the pieces of one. He didn't talk much about the past, but once late, he told me he'd learned the hard way to stop judging shooters by their size or their mouth or their swagger. "Had a guy once," he said, "biggest, loudest operator you ever saw, benched a house, talked a mile a minute about all the things he'd do when the time came." He took a slow breath. Time came, he froze, just locked up solid, and a kid I'd been mentoring, skinny little guy half his size, did what needed doing. He looked at me. I stopped reading the cover after that, started reading the book. So when Reyes walked in small and quiet, Vargas didn't see weakness. He saw a closed book, and he was patient enough to wait and find out what was written inside. The rest of us weren't that patient. That's just the truth. That first night I couldn't sleep. The cold does that, and the waiting does worse. I lay there listening to Cooper snore and watching the canvas of the tent shift in the wind, and I noticed Ray's wasn't in her cot. I found her outside. She was sitting on an ammo crate, looking out at the Black Hills, with a small notebook open on her knee. She was writing something by the light of a red lens flashlight. "Can't sleep?" I asked. Dumb question, nobody out there slept. She didn't look up. "I'm logging conditions, wind, temperature, humidity if I can guess it. Helps me build a picture before we move." "You do that every night?" "Every night I'm somewhere new." She closed the notebook. "You're the radio guy, Marsh, right?" "Yeah, Marsh." "You always this nosy, Marsh." I laughed, first time I'd laughed in days, only with the new people. She let a small smile crack through just for a second and then it was gone again. "Get some sleep. You'll need it. Something tells me this place isn't going to stay quiet." I didn't know it then, but that was the most honest thing anyone said to me that whole deployment. I sat with her a while longer. I don't know why. Maybe because she was the only person awake, and the dark out there has a way of making you want company, even quiet company, even company that doesn't want yours. After a few minutes she spoke again, surprising me. "You ever notice how the wind changes right before dawn?" "Can't say I have." "It does, drops off, then comes back from a different direction, like the whole world's resetting." She tilted her head toward the hills. "I learned to read it on a ranch, my grandfather's, West Texas, flattest, meanest country you ever saw, wind that peel paint off a barn." She almost smiled again. "He taught me to shoot, coyotes mostly. They were going after the calves. First thing he ever told me was, the rifle's the easy part, the wind's the conversation. You don't beat it, you listen to it." It was the most she'd said about herself, and I think she only said it because it was dark and she figured I'd forget. I didn't. "Your grandfather's still around?" I asked. "No." She closed the notebook again, a little harder this time. "Get some sleep, Marsh." So I did, or I tried, and the last thing I saw before I ducked back into the tent was her sitting there alone, small against all that black, listening to a conversation the rest of us couldn't even hear. The next 2 days were nothing. Patrols, heat, the slow grind of waiting for orders that wouldn't come. Cooper kept needling her. She kept ignoring him. The other guys, Daniels, Ostrowski, a quiet kid named Fam who couldn't have been older than 23, they didn't say much either way. They were watching, same as me, trying to figure out what she was made of before the situation made the decision for us. Daniels was the team's senior man under Vargas, lean and dry, the kind of guy who'd been shot at so many times it had stopped impressing him. Ostrowski was the breacher, all forearms and bad jokes. And Fam was new, nearly as new as Ray's, and you could tell he hadn't seen the thing yet that turns a young man quiet. He still asked questions. He still flinched at loud noises. He still believed, somewhere in him, that it might not be as bad as the old guys said. On the second day, Fam worked up the nerve to talk to her. I watched it happen. He sidled over while she was cleaning the rifle. She was always cleaning the rifle, and stood there a minute before he got the words out. "That's a nice setup," he said. "What's your effective range on it?" She glanced up, sized him up the way she sized up everything. "Depends on the day. The rifle'll reach further than the conditions usually let it." "What's the longest you've ever made?" A pause, long enough that I don't talk about it. Fam nodded like that made sense, which it didn't, not to a kid. But then she did something I didn't expect. She slid over on the crate and patted the space beside her. "Sit down, you want to learn something useful." And for the next hour she taught that kid more about reading wind and light and mirage than he'd learned in all his training, talking low and steady, drawing little diagrams in the dust with a stick. Fam hung on every word. And Cooper, watching from across the camp, called out something about story time, and she ignored him completely and kept teaching the kid who actually wanted to learn. That told me something. She didn't waste energy on the people who'd already made up their minds. She poured it into the ones who hadn't. It was on the third day that we found out what she really was. We'd set up an observation post on a ridge above Sarkani. Ray's and her spotter, a lean guy named Tate who'd come up with her from the same unit, took the high ground with the rifle. The rest of us held back in the rocks, watching the village through binos, watching the road, watching the slow, ordinary life of a place that didn't know it was being measured. I want to tell you about that ordinary life because it makes the rest hurt more. There was a market day starting up. Old men setting out fruit on blankets, a boy chasing a dog that had stolen something, women in bright cloth moving between the stalls, and the school, a low mud brick building on the north edge of town, where mid-morning we watched a ragged line of children file in. Little ones. The kind of small that makes your chest ache when you've been away from home too long. A teacher in a dark headscarf counted them through the door, touching each head as it passed, the way you'd count something precious. I had a daughter back home, 4 years old then. I watched those kids go into that school and I thought of her, and I had to put the beanos down for a second. That's the thing nobody puts in the reports, the ordinary, the fruit on the blankets, the hand on each small head. I was on the radio with command when Tate's voice came over the net, low and flat, the way spotters talk when they don't want their own heartbeat to shake the words. We've got movement, north end of the village, vehicles, 3 of them technicals. Technicals means trucks with guns bolted to the back. That means fighters. That means the day just changed. Vargas got on the net. How many personnel? A pause, then raised his voice calm as still water. Counting, 8 visible. No, 10. 2 more came out of the building. They're armed. They're moving toward the school. The school. That word landed in my gut like a fist. There were kids in that school. We'd watched them go in that morning. We'd watched the teacher count them through the door. And now 10 armed men were walking toward it. I want you to understand what that moment felt like, because the movies get it wrong. There's no music. There's no slow zoom. There's just a cold clarity that drops over everything, and the sudden awful knowledge that whatever happens next is going to happen fast, and people are going to live or die based on choices made in seconds. Vargas was talking to command. Command was talking back. Rules of engagement, asset positions, the whole bureaucratic machine grinding while 10 men walked toward a building full of children. And on the ridge, Dana Reyes was lying behind her rifle, perfectly still, waiting for someone to tell her she was allowed to save lives. I'll never forget what she said next. Just 2 words over the net, quiet enough that I almost missed it. I'm ready. The thing nobody tells you about waiting for a green light is that the waiting is its own kind of violence. Every second you stand still, the situation moves without you. Vargas was on the horn with command, and I could hear it in his voice, that tight, controlled fury of a man who knows exactly what needs to happen and can't make it happen because some officer 400 miles away wants to be sure. They are armed and moving on a civilian structure with children inside, Vargas said, slow, hard, spacing the words out like he was driving nails. I need authorization, now. The radio crackled, static, then a voice, stand by. Stand by. I watched Cooper's jaw tighten. I watched Fam's knuckles go white around his rifle. The kid looked over at me with an expression I'll never forget, the look of someone learning, in real time, that the world doesn't always let you do the right thing the moment you know what it is. Down in the village, the 10 men had reached the edge of the school's dirt courtyard. One of them was shouting. We couldn't hear the words from up there, but you don't need to hear words to understand a man waving a rifle at a building. The teacher came out, the same woman who'd counted the children in. She put herself in the doorway, arms spread, and even at that distance you could see her shaking. She was going to die, we all knew it. The man with the rifle raised it. And then Tate's voice came over the net, very quiet. Raise, winds picked up, quartering left to right. Call it 8, maybe 10. Copy adjusting. Range 940. 940 on it. They were doing the math anyway. Authorization or not, they were getting ready because they'd already decided that if that man pulled the trigger, he wasn't going to get a second shot. Here's what you have to understand about a shot like that. 940 meters. That's more than half a mile. The wind out there doesn't move in straight lines. It rolls and folds over the terrain, faster up high, slower in the valley, and a sniper has to read all of it like a language. The bullet would be in the air for over a second. In that second, the earth turns, the wind shoves, gravity pulls. You're not shooting at where the man is. You're shooting at where he'll be, in a future you have to predict perfectly. And Ray's had a teacher's life sitting in that math. I keep coming back to the conversation thing, what she told me that first night. The wind's the conversation her grandfather had said. You don't beat it, you listen. And lying up there on that ridge with a woman about to be murdered in her crosshairs, that's what she was doing. Listening, to the grass, to the dust, to the heat rising off the valley floor in waves you could see through a scope. Having a conversation with the whole moving world and asking it, very politely, to let one bullet through clean. The radio crackled again, command's voice. Element, you are weapons free. Repeat, weapons free, protect the civilians. Vargas didn't even finish acknowledging before Reyes's rifle spoke. I didn't see the man fall. I was watching the wrong spot, but I heard Tate. Hit, he's down. The man with the raised rifle dropped like his strings had been cut. The teacher flinched, stumbled back into the doorway. And for one frozen second, the other 9 men just stood there because their brains hadn't caught up to what had happened. One of them had been standing. Now he was a heap on the ground. No sound had reached them yet. The bullet beat its own noise across that distance. Then the sound arrived, a flat crack rolling down the valley. And the world came apart. The 9 remaining men scattered, but scattering is exactly what you don't want them to do, because now they were a problem in 9 directions instead of 1. They knew, roughly, that the shot had come from the high ground. They started shooting back wild, panicked bursts that kicked up dust on the wrong ridge, 300 meters from where Reyes actually was. They were shooting at a ghost. 2 of them are pushing the kids, Tate said, trying to use the school as cover. They're going inside. Not happening, Reyes said. Crack. Hit, doorway. He's down, he's blocking the door. She dropped a man right in the entrance, his body wedging the door so the others couldn't easily push the children inside as shields. That wasn't luck. I want to be very clear about that. Later, much later, when I'd seen enough to understand what I'd watched, I realized she'd done it on purpose, chosen that target, that spot, because a body in a doorway buys time and confusion. She was thinking 3 moves ahead while men were dying in the present. 2 down, 8 to go. And the clock in my head had started, though I didn't know yet it would become the thing everyone would talk about for years. Down in the rocks, the rest of us weren't idle. Vargas split us. Daniels and Ostrowski peeled left to flank toward the village. Cooper, Pham, and I held the center with Vargas. The plan was to push the fighters toward Reyes's line of fire and away from the school, herd them, make them run the wrong direction. It's a strange thing, being the bait and the hammer at the same time. We started moving down the slope, using the dead ground, the folds in the earth where they couldn't see us. The gunfire was constant now, but it was bad gunfire, scared men spraying rounds and scared men miss. I heard rounds snap past, high and wide. There's a sound a bullet makes when it's close, a kind of angry, tearing crack, different from the distant pop of the rifle that fired it, and I was hearing a lot of that sound, and none of it was hitting anything. I kept my head down and my feet moving and the radio strapped to my back, which suddenly felt like the heaviest thing in the world. Marsh, Vargas low, tell command we're decisively engaged. Tell them we need that drone overhead yesterday. I keyed the mic with a hand that wasn't as steady as I'd have liked. Got the message out. Command said the drone was 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. In a firefight, 20 minutes is a geological age. But Ray's only needed 20 minutes total. We just didn't know it yet. Crack 3 down. He was setting up an RPG behind the wall. An RPG. If that round had launched, it could have taken out half our flanking element. She'd seen it before it happened. Read the man's body language across 900 meters and known what he was reaching for. Crack 4 runner, headed for the technicals. She was thinning them out one at a time, and the terrible, beautiful logic of it was starting to dawn on the surviving fighters. They couldn't see her. They couldn't hit her. And every time one of them tried to do something useful, set up a heavy weapon, organize, flee, he died doing it. Fear is a weapon too. By the 5th shot, they weren't fighting us anymore. They were fighting the sky. I remember Fam beside me, low in the dirt, watching it happen. He looked at me with his eyes huge and said, almost to himself, "She's not missing. She's just not missing." Like he was trying to talk himself into believing it. And honestly, so was I. Here's the part I didn't see, and only learned afterward from Tate, sitting in the chow hall weeks later with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. Up on that ridge, it wasn't calm. I'd imagined it as this serene thing, the sniper, the rifle, the steady breathing. And the breathing was steady, sure. But Tate told me the position was getting hot. Some of the fighters had stopped panicking and started thinking. One of them, older, steadier than the rest, Tate figured he was the real second in command, had worked out the rough angle of the shots and started walking fire back toward the right ridge. Closer. A lucky burst had chewed up the rocks 10 meters from where Ray's lay. Stone splinters, dust, the angry whine of ricochets. "You'd think she'd flinch," Tate said. "Anybody'd flinch. Rounds that close, you feel them in your teeth." He shook his head. "She didn't move, not a muscle. She just asked me for a new wind call like we were discussing the weather." Because in a way they were. Tate told me the worst moment for him was when that steady older fighter got smart and got low and started crawling up a draw toward their position, using cover, doing everything right. Tate couldn't get an angle on him with his carbine, and Ray's couldn't depress the big rifle far enough to reach where he'd gone. "I told her, he's coming up the draw, I can't reach him, we need to move," Tate said. And she says, calm as anything, "He'll have to cross the gap at the top, 12 meters of open. I'll take him there." And then she goes right back to working the others, like she'd already filed him under later. "And did he cross?" Tate nodded slow. "He crossed. She took him on the 2nd step, never got the 3rd. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I've worked with a lot of shooters, Marsh. The good ones, when it gets hot, they get fast and sloppy, or they get scared and slow. She didn't do either. She just got quiet. Like the louder the world got, the quieter she got, until it was just her and the math, and that was the only thing in the universe." Tate told me something else too, the thing that mattered most. By the 6th and 7th shots, she'd started making choices that weren't strictly about the firefight anymore. There was a kid out there, a boy maybe 14, one of Massoud's pressed fighters, the kind of kid who gets handed a rifle and told his family will pay if he runs. He was crouched behind a low wall, gun in his hands, crying. You could see it through the scope, Tate said. Tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. He wasn't shooting at anyone. He was just holding the rifle like it might protect him, the way a kid holds a blanket. She had the shot, Tate told me. Clean shot, center mass. And he was armed, so it was legal. Nobody would have said a word. Hell, the after-action would have counted him a confirmed and moved on. She didn't take it. Instead, she put a round into the wall right beside him, close enough to throw stone into his face, close enough to make the point. And the boy did exactly what she wanted. He dropped the rifle, scrambled backward, and ran. Ran away from the fight, away from us, away from everything, into the hills where he might have a chance to just be a kid again. She missed on purpose, Tate said. Best shot I ever saw, and the one I'll remember is the one she threw away. He was quiet a long moment. You know what she said right after, didn't even take the scope off her eye. She just said real soft, "Run, kid, go home," like a prayer. And then she went back to work. Down at our level, Things were getting desperate for the other side. We'd pushed close enough now that I could hear individual voices, shouting in Pashto, orders maybe, or just panic dressed up as orders. The technicals were trying to reposition, engines roaring, and one of them swung its mounted machine gun toward our flanking element. That gun could have ended Daniels and Ostrowski in a heartbeat. A belt-fed weapon against two men in the open. There's no contest. I saw the barrel swing. I saw Daniels and Ostrowski caught mid-rush with nowhere good to go. My whole body went cold. I opened my mouth to scream a warning that would have been too late. Crack! The gunner slumped over his weapon, the gun swinging harmlessly skyward as he fell. Daniels hit the dirt, rolled, came up behind a wall and lived. He told me later he never even saw the gun, never knew how close he'd come. He just heard the crack from the ridge and felt the air change and kept moving, the way you do. And only afterward, looking at where that gun had been pointed, did he understand that a woman half a mile away had reached out and lifted death off his shoulders before he ever felt its weight. That made 8 down. I'd lost count in the chaos. The shots were coming faster now, each one a verdict delivered from a place none of them could find. Marsh, get down. Vargas grabbed my collar and yanked me behind a boulder half a second before a burst stitched across the dirt where I'd been kneeling. My ears were ringing. My hands were shaking. The radio kept squawking and I kept answering, and somewhere in the back of my skull a voice was saying, this is it. This is the day. This is how it happens. And then Ray's voice over all of it. Calm, always calm. To left, they're trying to surrender, hands up, north side of the courtyard. Vargas keyed his mic. Hold fire, Daniels, Ostrowski, secure them, watch their hands. The shooting stopped. Just like that. The silence after was almost worse than the noise. It rang. It had weight. I remember crouching there behind that boulder, sweat stinging my eyes, listening to the silence and not quite believing I was still alive to hear it. 8 men down. 2 surrendered. The technicals abandoned. And in the middle of the courtyard, that schoolteacher had come back out and was waving children out of the building, hurrying them across the open ground toward the far side of the village, away from the bodies, her arms spread wide like wings over a brood of chicks. Not one child was hurt. I keyed the mic. Command, this is 2-6. Engagement complete. Hostiles neutralized or detained. No friendly casualties. No, my voice cracked and I cleared my throat and started again. No civilian casualties. School is secure. There was a pause on the other end, then a voice I didn't recognize. Say again, 2-6. How many hostiles? 10, sir. 8 neutralized, 2 detained. And your sniper element fired how many engagements? I looked at my watch. I'll never forget the time. From the first shot to Ray's call that the last 2 were surrendering, I'd been half watching the clock the whole time without even meaning to. Sir, I said, 20 minutes. She did it in 20 minutes. The radio was quiet for a long moment. Understood, the voice said finally. And I swear I heard something in it I'd never heard from command before. Not an order, not a question. Just disbelief. We came down off that ridge slow and careful, because a firefight isn't over when the shooting stops. It's over when you've checked every body, cleared every building, and made sure the quiet is real and not just a trap catching its breath. I'll tell you about the walk down because that's the part that stays with me. More than the shooting, more than the noise, the walk down. The village had come back to life in pieces. Doors that had been shut tight cracked open. Faces appeared in windows. An old man stepped out into the road and just stood there, leaning on a stick, watching us with eyes that had seen too many armed men come through to be impressed by one more. But he nodded at Vargas. A small thing. A nod between 2 old men who understood each other across a language neither one spoke. We cleared the bodies one by one. I won't dwell on that part. It's not the part anyone wants to hear, and it's not the part that matters. I'll only say that war up close is not the clean thing the recruiters and the movies sell you, and that every man on the ground had been someone's son, and that even the ones who'd come to murder children were a heavy thing to step over. Fam went quiet during the clearing. The young man who hasn't seen it yet left his face somewhere in that courtyard, and it never fully came back. That happens to all of us, sooner or later. It happened to him there. The two who'd surrendered sat zip-tied against a wall. One of them was older, sullen, staring at the dirt. The other was younger and couldn't stop shaking, and when our interpreter spoke to him, he started talking fast, pouring out everything, that they'd been ordered into the village, that Massoud had threatened their families, that they hadn't wanted any of it. Maybe it was true. Maybe it was the thing you say when the guns stop and you're still breathing and you'd like to keep it that way. I don't know. I've stopped pretending I can always tell. The teacher found us in the courtyard. She was still shaking, but she'd got the children clear, and now she came toward us fast, talking in a rush of Pashto our interpreter could barely keep up with. She kept pointing at the ridge, at the high ground, at where the shots had come from. She's asking who, the interpreter said. Who was up there? She wants to know who saved her children. Vargas looked at me. I looked at the ridge. Reyes and Tate were coming down now, two small figures picking their way through the rocks, the long rifle slung across her back. She moved the same way she'd moved into camp 3 days before, quiet, folded down, taking up as little space in the world as she could. You'd never have known to look at her, what she'd just done. You'd never have guessed the ridge behind her was the most dangerous half-mile in the country an hour ago, and that she was the reason it wasn't anymore. The teacher saw her, saw the rifle, and she understood. I've watched a lot of things in my life I wish I could forget, but I've also watched a few I'd give anything to see again, and this is one of them. That teacher walked across the courtyard, past the bodies, past the soldiers, straight to a tired woman she'd never met and would never meet again, and she took Reyes's face in both her hands and pressed her forehead against hers, and said something none of us could translate and none of us needed to. Reyes, who hadn't flinched at rounds cracking 10 meters from her head, Reyes flinched at that. Her eyes went bright. She put one hand over the teacher's hand and just stood there, the two of them, foreheads together in the middle of the worst and best thing either of them had been part of. Cooper was standing next to me. Big mouth Cooper. He didn't say anything. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't have a single word. The interpreter leaned over to me quiet. She's saying, he stopped, listened, started again. She's saying, God put you on that mountain. She keeps saying it. God put you on that mountain for my children. Reyes didn't say anything back. What do you say to that? She just held the woman's hands and let her say it, as many times as she needed to. Back at camp that night, nobody could shut up about it. It's funny how that works. During the thing, everybody's silent. Afterward, everybody talks. It's the adrenaline coming out sideways, I think. The body has to do something with all that leftover terror, so it turns it into noise. Daniels acted out the flanking maneuver 3 times with increasing drama, each version a little more heroic than the last, the way these stories grow. Ostrowski kept saying 20 minutes and shaking his head and laughing a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. Fam just sat there with a small stunned look, turning his canteen over and over in his hands, not drinking from it, just turning it. Daniels got serious for a second in the middle of all the noise. He set down his coffee and looked around at us and said, "That machine gun was on me. I want you all to understand that. That gun was on me and Stro, and there was not one thing either of us could have done about it." He let that sit. "I'm here because of her. That's not a story. That's just what happened." Nobody laughed at that one. And Cooper found Reyes outside, sitting on that same ammo crate, writing in that same little notebook. I was close enough to hear. I'm not proud of eavesdropping, but I'm telling you everything, so here it is. "Hey," Cooper said. He shifted his weight, that big man suddenly looking like a kid who'd been called to the principal's office. The stuff I said, when you got here, the babysitter thing." Reyes kept writing, "I remember." "Yeah, well," he rubbed the back of his neck. "I was wrong about all of it. What you did out there, I never seen anything like it. Nobody has." She put her pen down, looked up at him. And here's the thing, she wasn't smug about it. She had every right to be. She could have twisted the knife, made him eat every word, and we'd all have said he earned it. Instead, she said, "You'd have done the same if you'd had the shot. I couldn't have made those shots in a year of trying." "That's not what I mean." She closed the notebook. "When that man raised his rifle at the teacher, you'd have felt it the same way I did right here." She tapped her chest. "The shooting's just math. Anybody can learn the math. The part that matters is what you feel when you look through that scope and see a person who needs you to be better than scared." She stood up, slung her rifle, and looked at him level. "You've got that part, Cooper. I've watched you. You run your mouth, but I've watched you put yourself between fam and the bad ground twice today without even thinking about it. That's the part that matters. You'd have done the same." And she walked off to her tent, leaving Cooper standing there in the cold, looking like she'd handed him something he didn't know he'd been missing. He never gave anybody grief about being new again. Not once the rest of that deployment. I noticed. We all did. I asked her about the boy, the one she let run. Weeks later, when we'd grown into something like friends, I asked her. "Tate told me," I said, "about the kid. 14 maybe. You had the shot and you put it in the wall instead." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. "There's a difference," she said finally, "between a man who chose to be there and a kid who got dragged. I can't always tell the difference. Most of the time I don't get the chance to even look. They're a shape and a threat and a number, and you do the job and you carry it. But that time I had a second. I could see his face." She looked out at the hills the same way she had that first night. "If I'd taken that shot, I'd have hit my number. 10 for 10. Real clean record. But I'd have killed a crying kid who was looking for a reason to run." She shook her head slow. "You know what my grandfather used to say? He said the easiest thing in the world is to pull a trigger. The hard thing, the thing that actually takes a steady hand, is knowing when not to." She turned the notebook over in her hands. "I'd rather miss on purpose and sleep at night than hit every shot and lie awake the rest of my life. The record doesn't matter. Never did. The people matter. That's the whole job. People think the job is the shooting. The job is the people." I didn't have anything to say to that. Some things you don't answer, you just carry them. The report that went up the chain was a clean, sterile thing. You know how those read. Engagement at grid such and such, ex-hostiles neutralized, Y detained, 0 friendly and 0 civilian casualties, sniper element credited with primary effects. It didn't say anything about the teacher's hands on her face. It didn't say anything about the boy in the hills. It didn't say, "God put you on that mountain." It didn't say 20 minutes the way we said it, with that hush in our voices like it was a kind of prayer. That's the thing about reports. They keep the facts and lose the truth. The facts are the 8 down and the 2 detained. The truth is everything the facts leave out. Ray's got a commendation for it. Eventually. The kind that takes months to process and arrives in an envelope and gets read once and put in a drawer. There was talk, for a while, of something bigger, of writing it up for one of the real medals, the kind they pin on you in front of cameras. Vargas pushed for it. I know he did, because he asked me to help him get the timeline exact for the paperwork, and I watched him work on it at night, slow and careful. A man who didn't write easy, laboring over every word to make sure they understood what she'd done. It got downgraded somewhere up the chain. These things usually do, reasons nobody ever explains. Ray's didn't seem to care, which made Vargas care more, which made her tell him to let it go. "I didn't do it for a ribbon," she told him. "I know that," Vargas said. "That's exactly why you should get one." But she let it go, and so, eventually, did he. She told me later she'd lost the actual commendation somewhere in a move, but she'd kept the notebook. The one with the wind calls and the temperatures, and in the margins of that day's page, in handwriting so small I had to squint, a single line that wasn't a wind call at all. She showed it to me once, before we rotated home and went our separate ways the way you always do. It said 10 targets, 9 taken, 1 given back. I asked her what it meant. 9 men who came to hurt children, she said, and 1 kid I gave back to whatever life he's got left. She closed the notebook. That's the count that matters, not the one in the report. We did go our separate ways. That's what happens. You go through the most important hours of your life shoulder to shoulder with people, and then a transport plane lands and orders come down, and the whole thing scatters like dust in that West Texas wind she used to talk about. Tate went back to their unit. Daniels and Ostrowski stayed in. Cooper got out a year later and runs a gym now, last I heard. And from what people say, he's the kind of man who notices the quiet new kid in the corner and goes over to say hello. Fam stayed in and made a career of it and turned into one of the steady ones, one of the quiet ones, the kind the young guys watch to learn how it's done. Vargas retired. Of course he retired. 22 years was already a miracle. And Rays, I lost track of Rays for a long time. That's the part that's hard to admit. The people who change your life don't always stay in it. We traded a few emails, then fewer, then the kind of silence that isn't anger, just life, just the current carrying everybody downstream at different speeds. But I heard things now and then the way you do. I heard she got out eventually. I heard she went home back to Texas, somewhere near where the ranch had been. I heard, and I hope this part is true, I've never confirmed it, but I hope it with my whole heart, that she works with kids now. Teaches them something. Shooting, maybe, the safe and careful way her grandfather taught her, or maybe just how to be steady in a loud world. The image of it sits right with me. Dana Rays, who learned to listen to the wind on a mean flat ranch, standing behind some kid now, saying low and patient, the rifle's the easy part. The wind's the conversation. You don't beat it. You listen. I've thought about that day a lot in the years since. About what we got wrong those first 3 days, doubting her. About what we mistake for strength, the loud thing, the big thing, the Cooper thing. When the real strength was the quiet woman folding herself down into nothing, listening when we thought she'd checked out, doing the math while the rest of us did the talking. People ask me when this story comes up what the most amazing part was. They expect me to say the shooting. 10 armed men, 8 down, 20 minutes, half a mile, wind quartering left to right. And yeah, that was something. I've never seen its equal, and I expect I never will. The SEALs I served with, men who'd seen everything. Men who didn't impress easy and didn't compliment easy and would have laughed in your face at the suggestion that anyone could surprise them. Those men stood in that courtyard and could not believe what she'd done. But that's not the part that stayed with me. The part that stayed with me is the shot she didn't take, the boy in the hills, the bullet she threw away into a wall so a kid could go home. Because anybody can be taught to hit a target. The math is the math. You can build a machine to do it. But it takes something else, something you can't train, something that lives in the chest and not in the trigger finger, to look through the scope at a frightened child in the middle of the worst 20 minutes of your life, and decide that the cleanest record in the world isn't worth 1 life that doesn't have to be spent. That's what the SEALs couldn't believe, not the 10 she stopped. The one she let live. She used to say the shooting was just math. I believed her, right up until I understood that the hardest math of all is deciding what a life is worth, and then having the steadiness in the worst second of someone's life to do that arithmetic right. Dana Rays did it right, 10 times over, and the world is quieter and a few children are older now because of 20 minutes on a ridge that almost nobody will ever know about. Somewhere out there, a 14-year-old boy grew into a man. He doesn't know her name. He never saw her face. He probably tells himself he got lucky that day, that the bullet that hit the wall beside his head was a miss. It wasn't a miss. Nothing she did that day was a miss. It was the most deliberate thing I ever saw a person do, a stranger on a mountain, half a mile away, deciding he was worth more alive than counted. But I know, and now so do you.